Carruth was a very talented footballer at the start of a promising career in the NFL, but all of that would come crashing down around him when he was accused of the most blood-chilling murder. So today's video is going to be another solved true crime case. Today we're going to be talking about the murder of Cherica Adams. But before we get into it, I do just want to thank our sponsors for making this video possible, Blueland. As soon as I heard about this company, I absolutely fell in love with the concept because they're all about sustainability and cutting down waste when it comes to your household cleaning products. Obviously, when you buy a bottle of cleaning product from the store, you use it all up and then you throw away that bottle and go and buy another one, which I've always hated. I hate single-use plastics, but I've never really known what to do about that until I found Blueland. They don't use any single-use plastics at all. Not in their wrappers, not in their products, not even in the packaging that they send it in. Basically, the idea is you buy your forever bottle and you'll keep this, believe it or not, forever, and you make up your own cleaning product to go inside there so that you can just refill that one bottle over and over again when you run out and you're not constantly buying and throwing away new bottles. How it works is you fill your bottle with warm water and then you pop in one of these tablets that will dissolve and fizzle away to create the perfect cleaning product. And once it's done dissolving, you just pop the nozzle back on and you're good to go. You're good to start cleaning your house. You've got everything you need. I've nearly run out, look. I need to get some more. I've been using their products around my house for about 6 months at this point, and honestly, I love them. They do an amazing job at cleaning, and I'm never gonna go back to buying new bottles every time. It just makes me feel like I'm doing something good for the environment, you know what I mean? Their products are super effective, super convenient, and they're all vegan and cruelty-free as well, and they're made with only clean ingredients. They're made without ammonia, without VOC, soy or nuts, chlorine bleach or parabens, and they're EPA certified, which means scientists have evaluated all of the ingredients to make sure that they meet the safer choice criteria. Not only are they better for the environment, but they're also gonna save you money in the long run as well, because instead of spending £3, £4, sometimes even £5 on a bottle of cleaner, Blueland's refill tablets work out at about £2 each. I got the Clean Essentials kit, which comes with a multi-surface cleaner, a bathroom spray, a glass and mirror cleaner, and a hand soap. If you buy a kit, you actually end up saving money per product, and if you use the link down below in the description of this video, you'll get 20% off of your first kit. So click the link down below to start saving money and the environment. Blueland currently ship to the US, Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. Thanks again to Blueland for sponsoring this video. Now, before we get into it, I do just want to give my usual disclaimer that I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone that I talk about in this video. This video is for educational purposes, and everything that I'm about to say is just information that I have found on the internet and I'm compiling into one video. There's only one content warning for this video, and that is that there'll be mentions of abortion throughout this video. It's quite a prevalent theme, so if you don't want to hear about that right now, I completely understand. Click out of the video now. Hopefully I'll catch you another time with another case. All that being said, let's get into it. So today's case takes place in North Carolina in 1999, where 24-year-old Cherica Adams was born and raised. She was born on June 30th, 1975 in Kings Mountain, and her mother Sandra spent a lot of time trying to figure out what she was gonna name her, because Cherica actually wasn't originally gonna be called Cherica. But her mother knew that she needed a very unique name because she just knew that her baby girl was gonna be a unique person. She knew that Cherica was gonna grow up to be something special, and so she needed a special name. So at first, she actually thought about naming her daughter Eureka, which was actually after a vacuum cleaner brand, but she just liked the name Eureka. But in her words, in her mother's words, she said she didn't want her daughter to be associated with dirt and cleaning and stuff, which I found funny. So her mother Sandra got thinking about how she could make this name even more unique, and that was when she decided, right, her mother was a big fan of Cher, really big fan, and she loved the name Eureka, so what if she put them both together? Cherica. A very unique name for a very unique girl, and she grew up to suit it very well, and everyone loved Cherica. She was a very, very sweet girl. Everyone always said that she was one of the kindest, most polite women they'd ever met. Her mother raised her very, very well. She was confident, but not in an egotistical way. In fact, that was something that a lot of people said about Cherica, was that she was completely unaware of just how beautiful she was. Like, she was a complete knockout. People described her as beautiful inside and out. She was just so stunning, but also just such a wonderful woman. She had a heart of gold. She never wanted to hurt anyone. She had serious strength, serious integrity. She was loyal. She was just a great woman by the sounds of things. She worked as a real estate agent, and she was a very social woman. She had a lot of friend groups. She was always going out doing different things. One of the things that she did quite often in her youth was entering beauty pageants, because like I said, she was blooming gorgeous. And when she was 22 years old, actually right before her 23rd birthday in June of 1999, Cherica was invited to a pool party. So Cherica and one of her friends arrived at this pool party, and they had no idea that this night was going to change the trajectory of Cherica's life forever. Because there at that party, Cherica was introduced to a man named Rae Carruth, who was an up-and-coming football player, NFL, like American football. And as soon as these two got talking, sparks were flying. It was like an instant connection. They laughed at each other's jokes. They just understood each other in a way that Cherica had never really found before. And at the end of the night, when the party was coming to an end and they had to say goodbye, the two of them found themselves not wanting to leave each other. And so Cherica decided at the end of the night, and this wasn't like her at all. Her friends said she'd never done anything like this before, but she decided at the end of the night to invite Rae Carruth back to her father's house so that the two of them could continue talking. And so Rae Carruth actually met Cherica's father the same night that he met her, which is kind of unheard of, to meet the parents the same night that you meet your romantic interest. But, you know, they got on well, and Cherica's mother said that this in itself spoke volumes about how Cherica felt about Rae. She must have felt that this was some special guy to bring him home to her family the first night she ever met him. Like, it must have been like a gut feeling that she just knew that this guy was a part of her life now, even though she'd only known him a few hours, so it just made sense to her to bring him back home, introduce him to the fam. And Cherica was right. The two of them got on like a house on fire, and within a few weeks of meeting, the two of them were an official couple. So let me tell you a bit more about Rae Carruth. He was just over a year older than Cherica when the two of them met. He was 24. He was from California, and like I said, a very promising NFL player at the start of his career. Rae had always been insanely talented at football, literally ever since he was in high school, and in fact, he was so good that he earned himself a scholarship for the University of Colorado so that he could play football for them. He played 4 seasons with the Colorado Buffaloes, and he did so well that at the end of that, he actually secured a contract with the Carolina Panthers for when he left university. But before I carry on telling you about his football career, I think it's quite important to run back to his university days and let you know that Rae actually got a girl pregnant. Her name was Michelle Wright, and I think the two of them had been in quite a brief relationship. They hadn't been together very long when she fell pregnant, and she decided that she wanted to keep it. And so the two of them ended up having a son named Ray Londo. However, Rae Carruth turned out to be quite a deadbeat dad. He was not involved in that kid's life, and he refused to pay child support actually for quite a while. So much so that Michelle actually had to take him to court and sue him, and court orders from that point on, he had to pay her $5,000 a month. It wouldn't have been that much if he'd just agreed to pay it in the first place, but I suppose he gets what he deserves. The reason that was so high, because $5,000 a month on child support, that's kind of insane. But in America, well, I don't know if it's like this everywhere, but basically it goes on how much the individual earns, goes on how much the father earns, and obviously at this point in time, he was playing for the Carolina Panthers, or he was just about to, and he was on serious money, so He did himself in there. He wouldn't have had to pay $5,000 a month if he'd have just agreed to pay whatever the original figure was in the first place. At this point, he'd actually just signed his contract with the Carolina Panthers, which was a $4 million contract, right? And he got $1.3 million just as an off-the-bat payment, an initial down payment. So this is a college kid that had gone from just your average college kid to a millionaire overnight. And obviously that does some things to a person, doesn't it? And he did what I think most 20-something-year-olds would do if they became an overnight millionaire. He spent it. Like, he spent. He was living it up. He was partying, buying all these luxury things. He was really treating himself with that money for sure. But he was still a great footballer. He didn't let his party lifestyle get in the way of his career and his performance. He was still really, really talented at what he did. He was number 89 on his shirt with the Carolina Panthers, and he ended up absolutely smashing his first year with them. Everyone loved him. That was until the opening game of the season in 1998, when Rae Carruth fell and broke his ankle mid-game. And that pretty much ruined the rest of the season for him. He was pretty much out for the rest of it. It took him a while to recover from this broken ankle, and eventually when he did, he was never the same again. He'd kind of lost a lot of his confidence and his agility. He just never played the same again after that. And it was around this time in his life that Rae was invited to that pool party where he met Cherica Adams. And Cherica was exactly what he needed at that point in his life. He needed a pick-me-up. And he got that in the form of a beautiful young woman to dote on. Until now, until meeting Cherica, Rae had been quite a player. As I'm sure you can imagine, young millionaire, he's famous, he's a footballer, he's living the life. He's not interested in commitment. He's having new girls every week. Like, he was that kind of guy. But Cherica was different. Like, there was something about her that made him want to text her. He didn't want to ghost her after one night. He wanted to keep this woman in his life, and he did. You know, after a few weeks, they were an official couple. And they were super, super happy, according to all their friends. They were just, like, the perfect couple. Or so it seemed, because in March of 1999, the two of them had been together about 7 months at this point, and they hit a bump in the road when Cherica Adams found out she was pregnant. It was unplanned, but Cherica was happy. She was very surprised, but she was happy. She was excited. But Rae was quite the opposite. He seemed disappointed when she told him. Cherica remembered him just being quite upset, and rather quickly that upset turned into anger. He was angry that she was pregnant, and he started blaming her for it, and he was saying, I'm already paying $5,000 in child support every month. I don't want to be paying any more. Like, his immediate response to finding out that his girlfriend that he loves is pregnant was not to, support her emotionally, as you might expect, as you would hope. His first reaction was to stress about the money that it would cost him. Rae knew that his career was at an all-time low at this point, and he wasn't convinced that he was going to be on good money forever, and it was really kind of stressing him out. And he just straight up refused to have another child, which, would have been okay if he'd have communicated it in a nice way. But he didn't. He wasn't empathetic. He wasn't respectful at all. Not once. Instead, he demanded that Cherica go and get an abortion as soon as humanly possible. And she had no say in the matter. She couldn't even, chill on the decision for a while and make sure that that was what she wanted to do. He said she had to get that abortion now. And he was just going about this in the most awful of ways. But Cherica actually stood her ground here, and she said, no, this baby is mine too. I want to keep it. And she even told him, look, if you don't want to be in this baby's life, you don't have to be. You don't have to be a father figure. But I want to keep my baby. She said that she was willing to be a single mother if that's what she had to do. And Rae said, okay then, you keep that baby, but I'm not going to be in your life. And with that, they split up, and Rae didn't want anything to do with Cherica or that baby. And that was just how things were going to be. And actually, Cherica was glad that this had happened so soon into their relationship. They'd only been together 7 months, but this spoke volumes about Rae Carruth. This really showed her the kind of man that he was. And this made her realise that she didn't want to be with a man that acted like that. She wasn't really missing out on much here. Like, good riddance. So Cherica went through this entire pregnancy alone. Well, no, not exactly alone, because she did have a really good support network around her. Her friends were there, her family was there, everyone was very supportive. She just didn't have the baby's father. In November of 1999, she was 8 months pregnant and everything was great. She was healthy, the baby was healthy, she was 1 month away from giving birth and she was so excited. But then on November 16th, 1999, police received the following phone call.
Any police fire on it?
Police, I've been shot. I'm 8 months pregnant.
Okay, ma'am, you're 8 months pregnant, you've been shot, you're at Wessex Square.
Community.
Okay, ma'am, I'm gonna connect you to medic. Continue to talk to them because, ma'am, we have to help you. We have to find out where you are.
What's your husband name?
I don't have one.
Or your boyfriend, the one you said that was with you? Where's he
He's
at?
in the car in front of me and he slowed down and I'm like, what of a second did this?
And then where did he go?
He just left me.
Okay. All right, what's his name?
Rae Carruth, he went to the Panthers.
Okay, what's his name?
Rae Carruth.
Rae Carruth.
89.
Cherica Adams, at 8 months pregnant, had been shot. And as you heard her say there in the phone call, Rae Carruth was at the scene. She'd been driving behind him, he was in his car in front and she was in her car, and at one point he slowed and came to a stop. So obviously her behind him, she had to stop as well. And when she stopped, that was when another car came up beside her. She didn't see who was in it, and they shot her through the window 4 times. The car then sped away, and so did Rae Carruth in front, leaving Cherica Adams alone, bleeding out in her car. So police and paramedics rushed to where Cherica was, and when they arrived, she was in a really bad way, but she was still conscious, and so they were hopeful that they might be able to save her. So she was sped off to hospital for urgent treatment, and by the time she actually arrived there, she was categorized as being in critical condition. She actually fell into a coma literally within minutes of arriving at the hospital. She was unconscious. And doctors had so much to worry about here on so many different levels. Not only was this woman bleeding out, she was also in a coma, but she was also 8 months pregnant. They had a baby to save as well. There was the potential to lose 2 people here, not just one, not just Cherica, but also her baby. And so doctors made the decision now, while Cherica was in a coma, to take her in for emergency surgery and try and give her a C-section to save her baby. They did keep trying to save Cherica as well all the way through this emergency C-section. They still had her hooked up to all these different things and they were operating on her as well. But at this point, they'd kind of assessed the situation and they realized that they might lose Cherica. And there was the possibility here to be able to save the baby. Even though they might lose her, it was better to save one person instead of neither of them. As this was going on in the operating room, Sandra, Cherica's mother, had arrived at the hospital and she'd been told everything that the hospital knew at least. And now that they were trying to deliver her daughter's baby, she felt that Rae Carruth needed to be there. He needed to be there for the birth of his child. At this point, I don't think Sandra knew the circumstances of Cherica's shooting. I don't think she knew that she was with Rae when she was shot. And so she tried to call Rae, but he wasn't picking up the phone. She's calling and calling, even texting. She even paged him. Remember pages? And again, he just wasn't responding to any of it. Meanwhile, in the operating theatre, doctors were trying to monitor this baby's health as they were trying to do this emergency C-section, and honestly it wasn't looking very good because this baby had been deprived of oxygen for quite a while at this point. But after 70 long minutes without oxygen and through a very difficult delivery, the baby was born. It was a little boy and he was healthy. Everything was okay. He survived, but not without complications, because due to the lack of oxygen as the baby was being delivered, he actually had cerebral palsy and brain damage. He had to be put on a neonatal intensive care unit for weeks after this. He was hooked up to a bunch of machines that were all just trying to keep him alive and monitor his condition, because not only did he have cerebral palsy and brain damage, but he was also premature as well. He was a month early, which comes with complications in itself. And because he was premature, he was just so tiny. Sandra remembered seeing her grandson And she was just so worried for him because he was this tiny, tiny little thing hooked up to all these machines. It was so scary. At this point, Cherica was still in her coma, and actually they'd put her on life support. So the baby is hooked up to all these different monitors trying to keep him alive. So is Cherica, and Sandra is just panicking. She's still desperately trying to get hold of Rae Carruth because that's the father of the baby. That is her daughter's ex-boyfriend. She needed someone to go through this with. She needed someone to understand this. And besides, she wanted Rae to meet his son that had just been born. So she's still calling and calling and calling. And eventually, Rae picked up the phone and he learnt of the very sudden birth of his son. And so he said, right, okay, I'll come. And eventually, after quite a while actually, he wasn't in any kind of rush to get to the hospital. He arrived with a friend and his new girlfriend. When he came into the hospital, he barely even acknowledged Sandra, Cherica's mother, his child's grandmother. He seemed not worried in the slightest either. He was very, very calm. Even though both his son and Cherica were in very concerning states, he didn't seem to have a worry in the whole entire world. It almost seemed like he was in a rush. Like he just wanted to get this over and done with so that he could leave the hospital with his mate and his new girlfriend. So anyway, the nurses took him to the ICU where his son was hooked up to all these monitors. When he was there, Rae got out his camera, snapped a picture of his baby, who was, like I say, hooked up to all these monitors in a really, really bad way, snapped a picture. The nurse said, oh, do you want to hold him? We can like make it work and you can hold your baby. And he was like, no, don't worry about it. And he left. He took a picture of his baby and then left the hospital. He didn't care about Cherica. He didn't care to stick around the baby either. And Sandra remembered thinking as soon as Rae left that hospital that he had to have something to do with the shooting. He had to have something to do with this. Just the way that he was acting was so odd and he didn't care at all. She'd never seen him act like this before and him being involved seemed like the only explanation. So police had obviously been involved in this whole thing ever since they received Cherica's phone call letting them know about the shooting, and they'd spoken to everyone that they could. They'd already spoken to Sandra at this point, but after this interaction with Rae, she decided to go back to the police and tell them that something wasn't right here. And police agreed that the way that he'd acted at the hospital was just downright suspicious, especially given that he was at the scene of the shooting. He was literally in the car in front of Cherica when she was shot. So police immediately tracked Rae Carruth down and arrested him, and he was put on a $3 million bail. But remember, he himself was a millionaire, and so he actually managed to pay off his own bail and get released. He was actually only in police custody for less than 24 hours before he managed to get that money, pay the bail, and get set free. But this was on one condition, and that was that if either Cherica or the baby died at any point, you know, if their conditions worsened and they actually ended up passing away, Rae Carruth would be rearrested in connection with this. Because at that point, this is a murder case, not just a shooting. And this was just devastating to everyone that knew and loved Cherica, that the person that seemed like the biggest suspect in her shooting had managed to pay his own bail, and now he was just back out there in the world, partying, living it up, going on dates with his girlfriend, as if nothing was happening, as if Cherica wasn't dying in hospital, literally on life support. And this went on for weeks, by the way. Cherica and her baby boy were both still in hospital for weeks, hooked up to all these monitors. Cherica was still in her coma, and she wasn't showing any signs of progress at all. Her baby, on the other hand, was making progress. He was getting better day by day, and soon he wasn't going to need all these monitors. He was going to be able to, you know, go home and be a normal baby. But with Cherica, all they could do was wait. I mean, they'd done pretty much everything that they could think to do, and now they just had to hope and pray that she did get better and that she would regain consciousness. 2 weeks after the shooting, on November 30th, a man walked into the police station and he said he wanted to speak with officers because he had some information relating to this case. His name was Michael Kennedy. He told police that he was a friend of Rae Carruth's, and he claimed he knew exactly what had happened to Cherica Adams. So he sat down for an interview with police and he told them everything that he knew, starting from the morning of the shooting. Rae Carruth had gone to Michael Kennedy's house, to ask for a very specific favour. Rae asked Michael if he could borrow a car that wasn't too flashy, which immediately was a bit weird because Rae Carruth was literally known for being flashy. He spent money on things and he showed that off. Like, he had the most expensive of everything. It wasn't like him to want to be understated. But also, saying that he had a lot of money, I mean, he literally just paid his $3 million bail. He had money. So why couldn't he buy his own non-flashy car? Because those are the less expensive ones anyway. Why have you bought yourself 1 million flashy cars, but you don't want to buy your own non-flashy car? Regardless, Michael Kennedy agreed. He was like, yeah, sure, you can borrow one of my cars. I mean, he was thinking all these different things in his head, like, this is a bit weird, but still, he agreed. And later that day, Michael drove this less flashy car to Rae Carruth's house. And while he was there, he was like, hang on, why do you want this? Like, why do you need this car? And Rae Carruth proceeded to tell Michael Kennedy his whole plan for that night. And he gave like backstory as well. He was going into this story. He told Michael about how he already had one kid that he was paying $5,000 child support a month for, and now Cherica was pregnant and he didn't want to be doing that again. It was only a matter of time until she was probably going to take him to court and make him pay another $5,000 a month for another child that's now $10,000 a month. And Rae wasn't having that. He wasn't going to let it get to that point. Actually, his exact words to Michael was that Cherica was trying to juice him for his money. And he had a plan on how he was going to put a stop to this, along with one of his associates named Van Brett Watkins. Now, I don't know too much about Van Brett Watkins, other than the fact that he was a very, very dodgy guy. I think he was a criminal for hire, and he was willing to do just about anything if the money was right. A few days before the shooting, Rae Carruth had approached his associate Watkins and simply asked him how much would it take to beat up a girl and make her abort her baby. To which Watkins replied, I don't beat up no girl, I kill people. So Rae Carruth was left with two options here. He either did nothing, Cherica went ahead and had the baby, and he would have to pay another $5,000 in child support every month, or he could pay Van Brett Watkins to murder Cherica and the problem would be solved. He wouldn't have to pay. And it didn't take Rae Carruth very long to make a decision here, and straight away he asked Watkins how soon he could do it. To which Watkins said he was going to need a gun first. For obvious reasons, Watkins didn't have his own gun. He didn't have like one gun that he used for all his different crimes for hire, because it's easily going to get traced back to him that way. He was going to need a different weapon for each job that he was hired for, and that was Rae's job. Rae had to go out and find the gun for Watkins. And actually, by the morning of the shooting, the day that they'd planned to do the shooting, Rae still hadn't found a gun, and he was running out of time. And so when Michael Kennedy came to drop off this less flashy car, Rae asked him if he could borrow a gun. And at this point, as soon as Rae asks that, Michael starts freaking out. Like, he can tell what the plan is here. Although Rae hadn't said it explicitly, it's obvious what he's trying to do here. He has hired a hitman to murder his pregnant ex-girlfriend. And Michael didn't want any part in this. And so he actually tried to take his car back with him because he didn't want Rae to be able to use it. But Rae wasn't going to let that happen. In fact, he started threatening Michael, saying that if he didn't just go through with this plan, then he would be next. Rae also pointed out that Michael knew the whole plan now, because he told him everything, and so if they were to go ahead with it and get caught, Michael would also get in trouble because he's kind of implicated in it, isn't he? He essentially blackmailed Michael Kennedy into submission, and so out of fear, he agreed to be part of this plan. But now that Rae knew that he could scare Michael like this, things just went from bad to worse. Not only did he want to borrow Michael Kennedy's less flashy car, now he was asking him to drive it too. He wanted him to be the getaway driver for Watkins, who was going to be the hitman. Carruth and Watkins had formulated a whole plan by this point, and it started with Rae asking Cherica out on a date. Now, I don't know what the context was here. I don't know why he did this. Maybe he used the excuse of like, oh, the baby's going to be here in a month, like maybe we should see each other. Anyway, Cherica agreed. She voluntarily came out on this date. So the plan was basically that he was going to go on this date as normal, have a few hours with Cherica where she has no idea what is about to happen. The whole time he knows that he's going to try and kill her that night. His plan was to have this date as normal, and then at the end of the date, he was going to get in his car, she was going to get in hers, and he was going to ask her to follow him. He was going to drive her out to a more isolated area, and then he was going to call Michael Kennedy, his new getaway driver, and let him know where they were. Once he'd done that, Rae knew that he had to stall for a little bit of time because it was going to be a while until Michael Kennedy and Watkins got there. And so Rae just kind of slowly meandered around the nearby roads, you know, staying in that kind of area, but, you know, stalling, really. Until eventually Michael Kennedy would catch up in the getaway car with Van Brett Watkins in the driver's seat, gun in hand, ready for them to slow down next to Cherica's car and for Watkins to shoot at her and kill her. The plan was to make sure that both Cherica and her baby died, and Watkins knew that plan as well, so he made sure to shoot 4 times, not just once, not just twice. He was trying to kill both her and her unborn baby. And the shooting went exactly to plan. As we know, that is exactly what happened. And ever since that shooting, Michael Kennedy had not been able to live with himself. He didn't want to do it. He never once wanted to do it. As soon as he found out what the plan was, he tried to get away, but he had to take part in it because he feared for his life. And police believed Michael Kennedy. This man that had just randomly walked into the police station and given them all this information, they believed him. They didn't doubt his story at all. This case was very quickly just solving itself in front of their eyes, but right now, they didn't know if Cherica Adams was going to pull through. Was this case going to be an attempted murder, a first-degree murder? They didn't know. They weren't going to know until Cherica either recovered or passed away. And for 2 weeks, even after this, so now it's been about a month, Cherica is still in her coma. She is still on life support and she has still not shown a single sign of progress. And at this point, it was looking unlikely that she ever was going to recover. And that was when her mother, Sandra, made the heartbreaking decision to turn off her daughter's life support. And Cherica Adams passed away peacefully in hospital on December 15th, 1999. Sandra took great comfort in knowing that her daughter was no longer suffering. She was now at rest. And in fact, Sandra said that she looked as peaceful when they turned off the life support machine as she had the day that she was born. Cherica Adams' official cause of death was noted as multi-organ system failure due to gunshot wounds to the chest and abdomen. It was really a miracle that her baby boy had survived this ordeal, with the gunshot wounds being literally so close to him. It really is a wonder that he survived. And by now, this baby boy was a month old, and he still didn't have a name because, I mean, they'd really been hoping that Cherica was going to come round from her coma and be able to name her baby herself. But obviously now that wasn't going to happen. And so his grandmother, Sandra, took on that responsibility herself, and she named her grandson Chancellor Lee Adams. And he was actually released from hospital around the same time that Cherica passed away, and he was healthy. He was perfectly happy and healthy. I mean, he did have the complications due to the lack of oxygen, but other than that, he was a normal baby boy now, and he was being cared for at home by his grandmother. So now, this case is officially a murder case. Now that Cherica has passed away, this is murder. And so police rushed to try and track down Rae Carruth, but it wasn't going to be that easy. Rae had somehow found out that Cherica had passed away in hospital. And remember the terms of his bail, by the way. The rules were that if Cherica or the baby passed away, he would be rearrested in connection with this. And he knew that, and he panicked. Not only that, actually, I think he'd also caught wind of the fact that Michael Kennedy had gone to the police and told them everything. So at this point, he knew he was screwed. He knew that his only other option, if he didn't want to get arrested, was to go on the run, was to flee. At 10 p.m. that evening, Rae Carruth called one of his friends named Wendy Cole, and he begged her to drive him to California. And at first she was reluctant to. She didn't want to. I don't know if she knew about all of this that was going on, but she didn't want to drive him. Eventually he persuaded her, and she went and picked him up, and they set off to California. By this point, the FBI had issued a nationwide arrest warrant for Rae Carruth, and so there were eyes everywhere looking for him, and it wasn't long until he was spotted. The FBI got a tip-off that Rae was staying with Wendy Cole in a motel in Tennessee, and so they rushed down there to this specific motel, and they went and spoke to the staff. And they said that a man matching Rae Carruth's description had been staying in that motel with a lady, but they couldn't remember which room he was in. And I don't know why the police couldn't just like go and knock on the doors and see, because I mean, you are the police, you do have like the authority to do that, do you not? But anyway, they couldn't do that for some reason, and so they had to come up with a more elaborate plan. Instead, they decided to do like a stakeout mission. They were gonna sit in their cars in the car park and just stare at these motel rooms until they saw either Rae Carruth or Wendy Cole coming out of one of them. I don't know, surely it would be easier to just go and knock. Anyway. So after a couple of hours of this stakeout mission, police eventually saw Wendy Cole leaving one of the motel rooms, and she was completely unaware that she was being watched. And so police jump out of their cars, well, it's the FBI in it, but they jump out of their cars, they run over to her, and they ask her to step back inside that motel room with them. Once they got inside, police officers start like raiding this motel room looking for Rae Carruth everywhere, but they can't find him. And so they literally just said to her, "Where is he?" Wendy was completely silent. She did not say a single thing to those officers. She didn't even really make eye contact with them actually, but one of these officers was very, very smart, and they noticed that as soon as they asked her, "Where is he?" her eyes darted towards the car keys that were just on the table in the motel room. Wendy probably hadn't even realised that she'd done this, but the FBI are well trained in this kind of thing, like the psychology of this kind of stuff. She had subconsciously looked at those keys because she knew where Rae Carruth was. He was in a car somewhere. So police grabbed these keys off the side and they ran out into the car park to go and find Wendy's car. It was actually literally just a few cars away from where the FBI had been parked the whole time during this stakeout mission. So they got to this car and they're looking through all the windows, but they can't see anything inside. There's no one inside. And so they decided to go and open the trunk. At this point, police were like 90% sure that Rae Carruth was in the trunk of that car. And so they start acting accordingly. They stood outside that car and they started shouting to him inside, basically telling him the situation. Like, look, it's the FBI. We know you're in there. We're about to pop open this trunk. Put your hands up. All that kind of stuff. And so they opened the trunk of this car, and there, curled up in a little ball with his hands up, was Rae Carruth. He knew that this was all over now. And so he went very easily with police. He did everything they asked of him. He had his hands up the whole time. He knew that there was no point even trying to fight this. So police drove him all the way back to North Carolina, while Tennessee police came out to that motel just to kind of search it. I mean, it was their jurisdiction, so it was their problem, I guess. And they were searching this motel room, but it really didn't seem like there was any sign that Rae Carruth had even lived in there. And the theory is that Wendy Cole had been living in this motel room for a couple of days maybe, and Rae Carruth had been living in the trunk of that car because he was too scared to even get out of there and go into the motel room. And the reason they think he'd literally been living in this tiny little trunk of the car was because of the things that they found in there. They found $4,000 in cash in there. They found like snacks and drinks, spare changes of clothes, and loads of bottles of his own urine, because obviously he couldn't get out and go to the toilet. He'd been peeing in bottles and living amongst them for days. Oh, and there was also a burner phone in there. Can't believe I forgot about that bit. That same day, Rae Carruth was charged with first-degree murder. And as soon as his football team found out about this, because he was still on contract with the Carolina Panthers, let me tell you, they have never gotten rid of a player faster. That same evening that he was charged, the Carolina Panthers revoked his contract, and by the next morning, he'd been suspended from the NFL altogether. And then came the murder trial. And this was actually quite a unique murder trial, mainly due to the phone call that Cherica had managed to make after she'd been shot, because a lot of the things that she was saying to the 911 operator could be used in court. She was essentially like a witness to her own murder. The phone call was played out loud in court, where she literally said Rae Carruth's name multiple times, said that he worked for the Carolina Panthers, played for the Carolina Panthers. She even said the number on the back of his jersey. She said that he was in the car in front of her. Like, she'd literally given the whole version of events through this phone call. There was absolutely no mistaking who she was talking about in this phone call, because she'd really thought about this. She'd really given them as much as she possibly could, even though she was in such a dreadful state. She was bleeding out, but she knew she had to get that information across, because if she didn't make it, she was the only one that knew what happened. The prosecution even pointed out that it would be practically impossible for her to have like made all of this up on the phone to the operator while she was like drastically bleeding out from these gunshot wounds. Like, it wasn't even in the question that she lied about this. Michael Kennedy also stood up in court as a witness and told the whole story about how Rae Carruth had literally hired a hitman to murder his ex-girlfriend and his unborn baby just to avoid paying child support. And the courts actually agreed that Michael Kennedy had acted under duress here, like he'd been blackmailed to be a part of this plan, and they could tell that he didn't want to be a part of it, but he was literally told that he would be next if he didn't join in. He was doing this to save his own life. But just because they agreed that he was acting under duress doesn't mean he got off completely scot-free, but he had his own trial actually, but we'll get back to that in a minute. So Rae Carruth and Van Brett Watkins' defense teams came together and decided to argue that this hitman for hire plan couldn't possibly be true for a number of reasons. One of these reasons was that there was no record of a monetary exchange for this. Rae hadn't paid Watkins anything, which, like, obviously not. If he is a hitman for hire, a professional criminal, he's not gonna just do things by bank transfer. They have like ways that they go about that kind of thing, obviously. I'm sure he knows by now, if he's like a professional criminal, I'm sure he knows how to get paid without it being traceable. Like, that's the whole point of it, is it not? In fact, Watkins' team specifically tried to argue that he couldn't possibly be a criminal for hire because he didn't have his own gun. They had to source the gun that was used to shoot Cherica the same day. So, like, they were basically saying, if he's a hitman for hire, why wouldn't he own his own gun? And I don't know, probably one that doesn't want to be traced. We said this earlier, like, there's a reason he doesn't have his own gun, so that they can argue this in court, but that's exactly why he would get the client to source the gun for him, so that it wouldn't be traced back to him. So yeah, both guys' legal teams were trying to deny this murder for hire plot, and actually they suggested another reason why this had happened. Rae Carruth's legal team said that he'd actually got himself involved in a drug deal gone wrong. They said that Rae had been buying drugs off these people, and it must have been kind of a long-term thing. He was like a regular customer, and they must have gotten into some beef, like an argument, some sort of disagreement, and this drug gang wanted to shoot Rae Carruth, and so they tracked him down that night, went to where his car was, shot at who they believed to be Rae, but it actually turned out to be Cherica. She'd just gotten caught up in what should have been these guys shooting at Rae. So essentially they were saying that she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, those shots weren't meant for her, but she got caught in the crossfire of Rae doing dodgy business with these drug gangs. Which, like, even if that was believable, it's not. But even if it was, it really didn't take long for these men to ruin their own case, especially Van Brett Watkins. He took the stand and the prosecution was asking him all these different questions, and he was just laughing and smirking and giggling all the way through it. He was acting like he was above everyone in that courtroom, which is not a good look when you're up there for murder. At one point, the prosecution described him as a hitman with no weapons, to which Watkins responded, "If that's what you want to call me, I could kill you with my hands." You're really not helping yourself there, are you? Literally admitting that you're a hitman in your own murder trial. Like, that's really not a good look, to threaten to murder someone in your own murder trial when you're trying to say, "I'm not a murderer." Where's the logic? Where is it? Basically, it seemed that Watkins was very volatile. He was very quick to anger. Like, they could tell that they were pushing his buttons with the things that they were saying, like hitman with no weapon. It had triggered him, it had evoked a reaction from him. And so the prosecution started using this against him. They were like, this is working, let's keep going. They wanted to show just how easy it was to make this man aggressive and violent, so that they could show the jury how likely it was that he was a violent man. And at one point, he even threatened his own lawyer, his own team, the guy that is trying to stop you from getting into prison. He turned around and said to his lawyer, "I'm 286 pounds, I could rip you like a rag doll." Literally just making things worse for himself by the minute. At the end of this trial, of course, the jury found both Rae Carruth and Van Brett Watkins both guilty, but of different things. Rae Carruth was found guilty of conspiracy to murder, shooting into an occupied vehicle, and using an instrument to destroy an unborn child. He was found not guilty of first-degree murder, and that was simply because he was not the one that pulled the trigger. If he had, he possibly would have got the death penalty, but for that reason, he was spared the death penalty, and instead he was sentenced to 18 to 24 years in prison. Van Brett Watkins, on the other hand, was found guilty of all of the above. Everything that Rae Carruth was found guilty of, plus first-degree murder, because he was the one that pulled the trigger. But for some reason, he too was spared the death penalty. Instead, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 40 years, 40. Michael Kennedy pled guilty to second-degree murder for his part in the murder, since obviously he was the getaway driver. It wouldn't have happened if he hadn't have done his part. And so for that, he was sentenced to 11 to 14 years in prison. And then, curveball, there was a fourth guy named Stanley Abraham, and he was sentenced to 90 days in prison for some level of involvement in this, but I really couldn't find anything on this guy. Supposedly, he was just sat in the getaway car at the time that the murder happened. He was just in one of the back seats, but the courts agreed that he actually didn't know that the murder was going to happen. He happened to be in that car when Cherica was shot, but the reason he got those 90 days, I think, was because he didn't tell the police afterwards. So he wasn't a willing participant in this. He had no idea it was even going to happen. But from that point on, once he had witnessed it, he should have gone straight to police, but he didn't. And I think that was the issue. And right now, only one of those four men is actually still in prison, and that's Van Brett Watkins. Rae Carruth, along with the other ones, is a free man. He's just out there in the world after all of this. After literally planning to murder his ex-girlfriend and his unborn baby over what, money? Over $5,000 a month when you're a multi-millionaire? Rae Carruth was released from prison in 2018, and he was pictured with a big smile on his face as he left. And there was actually a group of fans waiting outside for him. So he did a meet and greet outside of prison after coming out of his after coming out of prison for murder anyway. As for Cherica's son, Chancellor Lee, he is now 22 years old, and he has lived his whole life with his grandmother Sandra. Of course, Chancellor never actually got a chance to meet his mother, but Sandra makes sure that her memory stays well alive in their family. She tells him all kinds of stories about Cherica, and they go and visit her grave very regularly. And I just want to end this case talking about Cherica's mother, Sandra. She had been an absolute superstar through all of this. She took on this baby boy as if he was her own. She is an amazing role model to that boy. She has displayed such strength and such determination and even so much empathy, because she actually ended up forgiving Rae Carruth for what he did to her daughter, for murdering her daughter. But it isn't just Rae that she forgives. She actually forgives all 4 of the men that were involved and that were sentenced to different things. Even Watkins, the one that pulled the trigger, he actually wrote to Sandra from prison to kind of apologise for what he'd done, and I'll just read you her response. Mr. Watkins, you know I am suffering. Because of your actions, I will never be able to hold my beautiful daughter Cherica again. Because of your actions, my grandson Chancellor cannot do the simplest things, like call me grandmummy or play ball with the other children. But despite my grief, I want you to know that I have forgiven you. I know you are suffering too for the horrible choice you made that day. I want you to know that you will always be in my thoughts and prayers, and I wish you peace. Sandra Adams. And that is the end of this case. Thank you so much for watching, and thanks again to Blue Land for sponsoring this video. Remember, when you click the link down below, you'll get 20% off of your first kit. A huge thank you to all of my channel members for supporting the channel and helping me decide the cases that I cover. All of my tier 2 members are on screen right now, so thank you so much. If you want to become a channel member, you can click the join button down below. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed, please leave a thumbs up down below, or if you want to watch another one of my videos, I'll link you one right here. Or if you want to subscribe to my channel, you can click that circle right there. Okay, bye. See you in the next one.